Hello and good day, everybody. I hope you can all hear me loud and clear. Maybe somebody can give me a quick thumbs up if you can hear me. Um, yes, thank you, Gavin. Lovely to see you. Thanks for coming. And Emiliano. Hello, my name is Anita Auerbach. I work for the Anticipation Hub. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today for this community conversation. What's a community conversation? Before we start, we just want to explain a bit the concept from the Anticipation Hub. We realized that anticipatory action requires a high level of collaboration, and we all needed an informal format to be able to talk to each other and exchange. And I think we all know, like, some of the biggest decisions get made in informal settings with people that trust each other. So we wanted to try to explore a format for that, where we could come together, share evidence, lessons learned, our practical experience, to talk about what it takes to strengthen, and scale anticipatory action. So the format of the community conversation is that we will kind of introduce some topics and we'll share some experiences with this fantastic lineup of speakers that we have today. And then for the second half, we'll switch off the recording, and then we'll have a conversation. We'll attempt to get cozy around the fireplace and have a conversation and really talk about these topics. So that means that we really want you to share as much as possible. Everybody that's listening in, please do share your contacts. If you would like your content, your research, your experiences, your links. I'm really happy if at the end of the day we have a vibrant chat with some information that we can share to learn from each other. Keep your questions. We have a Q&A at the top there. You can put your questions in there. You could put your questions in the chat, or just hold them tight until the second half of the community conversation, and then we'll unmute the mics. Like I said, switch off the microphones and have an exchange. I don't think I need to tell anybody in this call about why we're here, like why it's so important to get ahead of climate shocks. I don't think I need to talk to any of you about that today. I think most of you have either directly or indirectly experienced climate shocks, and you know why we're here. So I think what I want to emphasize about today is, and this is one of the reasons I was so drawn to the study by the fabulous IIED, the International Institute for Environment and Development, was because they've handed us these pragmatic kind of like tools about how to get ahead of these climate shocks. They've done some fantastic research. It's just mind-blowing. And again, one of the reasons I wanted to have this community conversation today is because when I first saw it presented late last year, I realized there are a lot of people missing from the anticipation community. It's like very high in the hazard season, and there were a lot of other events on. So I wanted to give the chance to the anticipation community to join us here today. We also have a very high download rate on the Anticipation Hub. So as well as welcoming everybody here online, I want to welcome people that are downloading for us. So back to the research. The research was done together with 8 governments. And really what it does is it gives us like the tools and the evidence that we need to move forward, right? So we're going to look today at how to do it in terms of the readiness index, which provides a framework to better understand the components of like how, and with some speakers in the call who have some direct experience of the how, and really important financially. Ritu will explain to us like some of the evidence behind how we can financially justify it, like why it makes sense financially. We all know from a moral perspective why it makes sense to get ahead of hazards, but still, with scarce resources today, governments, policy makers, decision makers, they need to explain and justify why they should spend money on building resilience and working on anticipatory action. So I really want to sincerely thank the Institute for this research. We can really use it, and we're very grateful for it. And with that in mind, I want to hand over to the Dr. Tom Mitchell, the Executive Director of IIED, to set the scene for us. Thank you for coming today, Tom, and welcome. Over to you.
Anita, thank you so much, and delighted to be here. I think really lovely to see lots of people on the call, many kind of familiar names and faces, but also to those who I've not met before. So as Anita said, I'm Tom Mitchell. I'm director of IAD, and I've worked on issues of disaster risk and resilience really for the last 25, maybe even 30 years. And one of the things that we developed even, I think, well over 20 years ago now, was a concept of adaptive social protection. So, acknowledging that social protection systems in the world do cover, I think, over 50% of the world's population have access to at least one social protection system. So in terms of actually scale and working on on large scale redistribution mechanisms, social protection systems are really important. But in few countries and in few circumstances have they really been used to be able to proactively build resilience in a way that's kind of quite explicit, even though many features of those social protection systems do chime well with building resilience capability. So really at IAED, it's something that we've been curious about for some time, is how that you can marry anticipatory action, early warning systems, trigger-based approaches with social protection systems that allow you to reach scale. So we're not really talking about small community pilots of 10, 20, 30,000 people, but to be able to reach a very large scale. And also the efficiency that that might be able to bring by using already established distribution mechanisms to communities. So that's been a kind of a big part of the work we've done, and I know Ritu and the team and others will come on to talk about that, including through the partnership that we've been developing with Comic Relief, who I know are part of this process too. But then the other aspect that you were just highlighting for us is really important, which is what's the most efficient way to finance that anticipatory action through established social protection systems, where you need to be able to work fast and at scale through government systems and in a way where the costs and kind of pricing of that are affordable, to be able to get that kind of bang for the buck. And then equally, when that does happen, what's the kind of return on that investment in terms of avoided costs of kind of humanitarian response and so on? So this is a big part of what we'll talk about today. The other dimension of this is how ready are all of those systems to be able to work like this? And we know that in many different countries and from the work that we've been doing, there's variable levels of kind of readiness in that regard to be able to work like this. And we'll go into some of that detail as well. But in IAD, just to recall, this is part of a significant body of work that we're doing related to climate resilience, loss and damage, working with communities to strengthen practical approaches to resilience. And Ritu and the team have been really very much at the heart of working on this across different communities, and partnership with the Anticipation Hub is a really key part of that, and with many others as well. So thank you so much. We're delighted to be part of this session and look forward to getting into the results of the research and the kind of practical steps.
Thank you so much, Tom. We are indeed a small community. I just learned that you used to play football with our Tim Woods from the Anticipation Hub as well. It's a very small world. So this is my absolute pleasure and privilege to move on to the next speaker, Ritu, who I'm very, very inspired by, to look at why anticipatory social protection matters, to dig a bit more into this evidence and the economic case. And Ritu, just to introduce you more formally, the Director of Climate Resilience, Finance, Loss and Damage at IIED, Alliance for Locally Led Action on Loss and Damage as well, and a lead author of the IPCC. I think really all of the speakers today, I would really encourage anybody listening to take a look at their LinkedIn profiles. I learned so much just from doing that the other day and ended up down a big rabbit hole of learning. So thank you. And so Ritu, tell us, what do you think the evidence tells us about the economic case for acting earlier? And what are the biggest opportunities for governments to shift social protection systems towards anticipatory action? And I think if you can make your screen a full screen. Yeah, then.
Okay. Firstly, thank you, Anita, for inviting us to join this community conversation. And although we try to share as much as possible from our side, we would want to reach out. And you also mentioned that it's a very small community, yet I was looking at the chat. There are new students, PhD students, and new people joining this community. And we would want to welcome all of you. And in any way that we can help you understand some of the dynamics of how social protection program can be used to build resilience, we'll be happy to do that. And before I start, of course, I'm Ritu Bharadwaj, and I work with IID. And within IID, we have also created an initiative called All Act, so Alliance for Locally Led Action on Loss and Damage. And this is an initiative where we work very closely with close to 50 governments, mostly least developed countries and small island developing states. But also a big part of our network is more than 70 grassroots organizations, national think tank, and we work very closely with them. And it's a very peer-to-peer learning setup where everyone is equal and we all contribute towards finding out joint solutions. And some of very good work that I'm very proud of is something that we have developed jointly with many of these grassroots experts and organizations who we rarely see in any of the international discourses, but they bring wealth of knowledge and expertise. So whatever I'm presenting today, I would say is a collective knowledge that we have gained over the years, and I thank all the people who contributed so greatly into all the deliberative dialogues that we organized to find out absolutely practical solutions for loss and damage, for building resilience, and so on. So, as Tom and Anita both mentioned, we are today's presentation would be mostly focused on understanding why social protection should be really used for building resilience, and what's the economic or the value for money behind doing so. And I always love to start my presentation by showing this slide, because what this slide shows is how differentiated climate impacts are. And while showing this, I also want to emphasize that climate impact, global warming is equally impacting everyone. But the reason why you see that the developed countries are not that impacted is because they have better capacity, better infrastructure to protect themselves from the disasters, or these impacts don't become disasters in those contexts. But if you look at the fragile and conflict affected states, you see here the least developed countries and the small island developing states, how the disaster intensity and frequency has increased in the recent times. Now, the thing is, we know the solutions to these problems, and many of these climatic impacts become loss and damage because adaptation is not optimally implemented, which is like an epic loss. Like, we know the solution and still we are not doing it. Why? Because there's a huge financing gap. We need somewhere around 1.4 trillion to address these challenges. At least building resilience, and this amount is only going to increase in the future. But what we have on the table in the form of pledges is around 300 billion, is what developed world has agreed to provide. But as of today, the news was that UK government has cut down its climate funding by 14%, and and more countries are cutting down on these pledges. On top of that, climate finance, of course, is limited, but on top of that, insurance protection is also really low, especially in the developing world, in the global south. And some of the projection shows that the insurance protection gap is around 1.86 trillion. Even the social development funding or the SDG funding is really low. It's somewhere to the tune between 2.4 to 4 trillion for the developing world. So while we know the solutions, financing is a big challenge. And when we are looking at such a big funding gap, we really need to put our weight behind initiatives which offer us value for money, where the systems and delivery mechanisms are already there. And with small tweaks, small funding gaps, being filled, the same programs can be used to also deliver resilience. And one of them is social protection program. We have ample evidence that social protection program can help address poverty and marginalization. And we also have evidence from PSNP program in Ethiopia, NUSAF 2 in Uganda, HSNP in Kenya, MGNREGS in India. There are so many programs in the past, or Bolsa Familia in Brazil, where we've seen that because social protection programs provide access to basic services, it helps communities tide over the crisis. It helps them absorb the climatic impact. And that is a really good something that we can build on. Now, some of the other figures I wanted to mention is in social protection program in low and middle income countries already invest somewhere around 500 billion in social protection, and around 45% of the global south people are covered through some form of social protection. So we have some infrastructure, some delivery mechanism, policies and systems already in place on which we can build on. But in order for that same social protection program to ride that ladder of building resilience, we need to invest in two modes of early action. One is we need to use the same social protection program to use it as an anticipatory response. See, disasters will continue to occur. There's no way we can stop it. Even it used to occur even in pre-climate change era. But the way we can or arm the society or communities to deal with that disaster is providing them some support before the disaster strikes. Preemptive cash transfer, food distribution, forecast-based payment. There are different ways in which it can be done so that they are able to absorb the impact. So they can they don't stop feeding their children. They can go to a safe shelter. So there are different ways in which a community can protect itself from that disaster if the support is provided to them before the disaster strikes. And the second is we can't keep these communities exposed to these disasters forever. So we really need to also use the same social protection program to build longer term resilience, and public works-based social protection program or increasing their capacities, their skills, improving their ability to participate in decision making at the local level. These are some of the ways in which we can enhance their resilience. And what that would do, it will help them create adaptive capacity and transformative capacity. Adaptive capacity where they can not just absorb, but also recover, bounce back from that disaster or that climate shock or stress. And transformative capacity where you are able to take them beyond the vulnerability threshold. So this is what we can really do with the existing social protection program. But of course, to do that, to make those changes or those tweaks, we need adequate finance, we need effective policies, and we need efficient delivery. And all of this should work towards creating that early anticipatory risk response mechanism. But there are challenges because if this was so easy, why are countries not doing it? Now, some of the reasons are because not all countries are exposed to same levels of risks or same types of risks. Some are exposed to sea level rise, some are exposed to cyclones, hurricanes, flooding, droughts, and so on. And in order to respond early or before a disaster, they should know that a disaster is going to strike. So for that, you need an early warning system. And that early warning system should be across different hazards. So, and then you also need to have effective targeting. You should have effective decision making, efficient delivery mechanisms. You also need to have a better coordination because when the disaster strikes, you can't just use the same delivery mechanism to reach out very quickly to people. You need to have a better coordination with local civil society, other grassroots organization, so that they can support the government in really reaching out to the targeted population as quickly as possible when the disaster strikes. So these are the gaps. So how do we really address some of them? The way in which we are working on addressing these are by two ways, a top-down and a bottom-up approach. And I'll be telling you about both of them. One is the top-down. What we are trying to see is how can we ensure that the policies, systems, and the delivery mechanisms of this around the social protection program stand? Where exactly the gaps are, but where opportunities are, so that we can do a targeted effort to address those gaps and use those opportunities. So we have developed a toolkit called Aspire, Anticipatory Social Protection Index for Resilience. It's a self-diagnostic tool. Any one of you can use it. But we used it in partnership with the government, and it uses around 37 indicators to assess how the policies and systems are performing, where exactly gaps are, and then uses around 33 indicators to look at the delivery systems across different social protection programs. So, I'm just going to show you what it gives you as a result of this assessment. So this is just a scorecard of Malawi. The idea is not to say that, this country is performing better, this country is performing bad, but to tell you exactly where the gaps are. So if you see the risk definition is 80%, it means that there are gaps where in risk definition, in target specification, in assistance types. And you will see we have divided it into policies and systems, because for a social protection policy program to also deliver resilience, first it needs to be defined in the policies. There has to be proper rules and regulations around. And then you need systems which can help that policy to be put into action. And then you need some delivery mechanism through which that same policy and systems can translate into actual benefit on the ground. So, this is just the dashboard which you can create as a result of using that toolkit. But then, as I said, it's a very objective assessment. It arrives at that dashboard using a very detailed indicator by indicator assessment, and even within each of those indicators we look at 5 or 6 different dimensions of that same issue, so that we can objectively assess where exactly the gaps are and where the opportunities arise. So I'm just not going to take you through all of that, but it's basically to show you how it assesses. It's a very detailed assessment. And then for each country, we also picked up 3 social protection program. One of them was a cash transfer, one was public works, and one was a food aid or a in-kind support, so that we could assess how different types or delivery mechanisms of social protection can be used to build resilience. Now we use this for 8 countries, and now we have also added Brazil, so it makes it 9 and 27 social protection programs. And as I said earlier, try to understand as a result of that, why should you do a diagnostic? What will it really yield? It will tell you exactly pinpointed where the gaps are, so that we can then assess the financial and technical resources that would be needed to address those gaps. Then understanding which stakeholder can contribute to filling up which gap. For example, if a country does not have an early warning system, it can't define the triggers on the basis of which you can start providing support to the community. Now that, of course, it requires financial resources, but it also requires technical dimension. And that can come from the local meteorological department. That can come in through insurance companies who have an expertise in defining those triggers. So we really need to understand which stakeholder can contribute to filling which gap, and then trying to help partners understand the business case for investment, because otherwise the investment will not come. We have very limited resources on the table right now. And then we set realistic timeline. And this is something we call Aspire Roadmap exercise, which we are very thankful to the support we are getting from Comic Relief for this. And we have started doing this exercise. So 9 countries where we have done the diagnostic, but now we are also showing how those gaps, and we can take countries through all this process. We have started this process in Brazil, and we have colleagues from Brazil who will talk about it. And we have also started doing this in Senegal, and in due course, we'll be expanding it to Malawi and some of the other countries as well. Now, I'll just show you very quickly what the gaps across these 8 countries looked like. So we classified them into areas that require financial and technical assistance, and then the area that require changes in regulatory or policy changes. And why we did this? Because some of them are low-hanging fruits that the countries can do themselves. They don't need any external financial resources. And that's why we did this diagnostic in partnership with the government, so that they can understand and they can make those or try to address those gaps. But as far as areas where it require financial and technical assistance, we need to bring in other players together. So very quickly, the countries which have early warning system across major hazards. The red ones are the ones which do not, and the greens are those who have it. So these are opportunities, these are gaps. We know exactly there are some countries which have national digitized social protection registry. Why it is an opportunity? Because then you can layer the risks. We can layer which geographies are exposed to climate impacts and who within those geographies are most vulnerable. So when a drought occurs or a drought trigger is alerted, then you can reach out to those people very quickly. You already know, or you can pre-identify those vulnerable households. Similarly, countries which offer portability to the migrant households, countries which have innovative financing mechanism, you can see, so this is across different dimensions. We worked out where there are gaps and where there are opportunities. And there are some interventions which require policy and regulatory changes. For example, countries which already prioritize shock responsive or anticipatory action in their social protection program, because then you already have a policy base. For example, in India, a lot of these social protection benefits are rights based. So you can work on that. So at least you have a good policy base on which you can build anticipatory response. So these are some of the, as I said, and some of the countries, there are some areas which definitely do not have, and one of these areas are, for example, spending on social assistance program as a percentage of GDP. In most of the countries, it is less than 2%. So I'm not criticizing the government, but the point is many of these countries have other competing demands, but they have to understand that investing more in social protection would help them address a range of challenges and issues. And we compare, we are also expanding this Aspire assessment to European countries right now, because what we figured out, for example, in countries like in Germany, Italy, and Portugal, these countries, they spend close to 35 to 40% of their GDP on social protection program. But are they ready? Are those social protection programs ready for delivering resilience? No. And we'll be sharing that in probably another event, what the evidence shows from those analysis as well. Now, Tom mentioned that we are also going to present something around the economic case. Now, some of those gaps that I showed to you in terms of financial and technical assistance, we also tried to understand how much would it cost to address those gaps. For example, defining trigger points for risk responsive delivery, early warning system, or integrating climate risks into social registry. So, these are country wise, but then it might look like 237 million is a huge amount to address these gaps in social protection program in 8 countries. But if you compare this 237 million with the amount of money that it's going to influence, is 62 billion. So these countries already invest 62 billion in social protection. By adding this or addressing the gaps using this money, you can make that 62 billion also deliver climate resilience. So these countries don't need to look into external resources for building a new program on climate resilience. Rather, the same existing investment they are doing will be able to reach out to absolute frontline community. Now, in order to also build an economic case, because without that, a lot of private sector MDBs would not come in and provide finances required for these countries, we also tried to build a economic case. And that we did firstly by using something what insurance sector does. It's called loss exceedance probability. So we looked at last more than 100 years of data and used the future climate projections to understand what loss and damage in these countries would look like from these disaster related impacts. So just to put these figures in perspective, a 5% LEP's loss exceedance probability is close to like 1 in 20-year event. So these are 5 countries in Africa, which we covered through Aspire assessment. So you can see in Ethiopia, a 1 in 5-year event can lead to a loss of around 8 billion. Similarly, the financial losses in South Asian countries like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, you can see India can see a loss of around 11 billion from 1 in 20-year event. Now, when this happens, again, these are all, as I said, we are very thankful to a lot of work that we do in partnership with our grassroots organization. So we collected a lot of data from the households. And based on that, what we have seen is we used four ways in which we can support for the assessment. So one is, if the existing social protection programs are used with no additional features in them, then a household would lose somewhere around 98% of their income. But if late humanitarian response is provided, then the same loss can be brought down to 59%. But if those too early action is provided, for example, if anticipatory direct benefit transfer is provided to the communities before the disaster strikes, then we can bring down that loss to 42%. And with early resilience investments, that the same loss can be brought down to 27%. Now, what is the benefit cost ratio of those four investments? So if the existing social protection program is used, then for every $1, you get a benefit of 0.23. But for early resilience investment, for every $1 invested through social protection program, it can give you a benefit of 5.17, and that anticipatory direct benefit transfer around almost double is the benefit. Now, when we first presented or came out with this economic assessment, there was a lot of discussion around like what's the validity of these figures, and therefore, even at that time also, we in our paper we included something called BCR exceedance probability. So what is the chance that this benefit cost ratio would exceed, or that probability of that benefit cost ratio occurring? And for that, we did the BCR exceedance doing 10,000 simulations to show that the chances of BCR exceeding 1 in case of early resilience building is close to 73%, and BCR exceeding 3 is 62%. Now, this should give a lot of confidence to people that even in different diverse contexts, things might change, because rural communities are facing different contexts. So you can't say the same BCR benefit cost ratio would be there in all the context, but then at least you will the chances of it exceeding 1 is 73%. And similarly, in the case of anticipatory direct benefit transfer responses, this is the kind of exceedance probability that is there. Now, we also then simulated the same for the 8 countries. Now, in these 8 countries, 1 in 20-year disaster can lead to a loss of around 21 billion. But with just 4 billion of early resilience investment, you can address this $21 billion of gap. And with 10 billion, almost half of this loss cost, you can address this loss. So clearly it makes an economic sense. And here is, more country-wise breakup of the same cost. And you can find more details in our paper as well. Now, so what we are trying to do through the Aspire roadmap exercise is to, one, run this diagnostic, identify where the gaps and opportunities are, and then work with different stakeholder group to see who can bring what expertise, either financial, technical, or policy and regulatory changes, to address all those gaps so that we can build that resilience top down, like changes in the policy, changes in the systems, and better delivery mechanism. But none of this result will show on the field if we don't work with bottom up with the community. And for that, we have created another toolkit called CSIC, Comprehensive Climate Impact Quantification Toolkit. And this we have done so that we can empower the community to explain what they need in the form of social protection. Why this is needed, why we need to change this, is because communities are now experiencing completely different type of impacts. And in something that we have started terming as non-economic loss and damage, is what is not currently addressed in many of these social protection programs. For example, mental health, anxiety, depression, loss of cultural heritage, and these all have impact on the community. And unless we provide support to them, they will not be able to recover from these disasters in totality. And that is why within this CSIC toolkit, we use something called participatory, it's based on the participatory rural appraisal that we used to do that earlier, but here we carry out participatory hazard and vulnerability assessment with the community. We ask them to rank what the mobility patterns are with the community, what kind of support they would need, what changes they need in the existing social protection program, how it should be delivered, in what form, and so on. But all of that being the insights are provided by the community themselves. And what we do in our case, we have created something called 3P, so predisposing, precipitating, and protective factor. Why? Because these climate impacts are occurring on top of all the inherent marginalization, vulnerability, gender empowerment issue, and so many other social, economic, and other drivers that were already existing in many of these communities. So we can't talk about creating a social protection framework without taking those predisposing factors into consideration. So when we design, we see how climate is impacting all those predisposing factors and what type of protective factors are really needed. And that's why it helps create a more grounded response on how that should be designed and developed. So this is something we have already tried in India. We created something, we used a people's plus tech or AI plus people's approach and created a toolkit called Comprehensive Climate Impact, Climate Resilience Information System and Planning Tool, where community itself is being given a tool where they click on the map, it calculates the catchment of that area and suggests to them what would be the most effective drought proofing efforts that can help build longer term resilience for them. And this is something which we are helping them do with the help of mentors. And these mentors are all grassroots volunteers themselves. And you see this lady, Rukmini, Saraswati, these are the women who are leading this whole process from the front. They have been, and they're all from the village community themselves, and they are the ones, they call themselves as climate sathis or climate friends, and they are helping build that resilience. So this is something that we are now trying out in Senegal, expanding this to Brazil, but with support from other funders, we'll also want to expand this to other countries as well. And this is the kind of roadmap vision we have. So right now we are working in 2 countries, but the idea is to then expand it to 32 small island states and least developed countries, and in due course cover all the SIDS and LDC in a way, and something that Tom Mitchell came up with this vision, that no community should be left without support within 60 minutes of a disaster. So something that we are working towards, and with the help of that roadmap exercise, what we want to do is to also bring in additional finances into the country, because clearly countries' own fiscal resources are very limited. So we want to build insurance pre-payout mechanism to support that anticipatory response. We are also helping countries like Senegal now design proposals for FRLD, Fund for Responding for Loss and Damage, so that additional resources that are needed to bolster the existing social protection program can come from these climate funds or green climate fund as well. We're also trying out innovative financing instruments, especially tapping into carbon markets. For example, in India, the MGNREG's program, our assessment shows that these programs, like the existing soil conservation, moisture conservation, can normally leads to around 250 million metric ton of CO2 mitigation. But these communities are not getting any benefit out of it. But we also want to design some carbon markets around the social protection program. And of course, we would want to bring in private sector investment through supply chain and other CSR funds. So with that, I'll stop. I know it's been a long presentation, but I hope I've tried to keep the interest alive. But I'll now want to pass it back to Anita so that we can make it a more community conversation going forward.
Thank you so much, Ritu. You blew my mind again, like you did. And I think listening to it, like some of this information for the second time, I think I would have to watch it 2 or 3 times. There's so much to digest there. It's so very helpful, the framing. I really find the framing of so many different components of what we're trying to tackle, and the fact that you've managed to kind of like take all of those different components, you know, like the hardware, the very down to the community level, and the fact that you mentioned even like small anecdotes here and there that like really help us to understand it, you know, and really important things, that some things can be done relatively at extremely low cost or even no cost, you know, based on existing systems and based on what resources are already in the country and with the community. So thank you so much. Please, everybody in the call, this is your time, your moment to learn. There's some questions in the chat. Please keep them coming. If you want to know how, if you want to have the contacts, if you didn't understand something that was presented, or you want to know more, now's your moment to ask. Please ask. And if not, we will definitely share all of our contacts in the chat at the end, and you can reach out to us afterwards if you're shy now. So the next section, we're going to look at what it looks like in practice, how to deliver this. Let's look at the experiences from some of our fantastic speakers. I'm very, very honoured to invite a speaker from the Prime Minister's office in Somalia, the Director of Food Security and Climate Change, Mr. Abdi Hakim Ainte. I believe he's on the call. I hope he's on the call. Are you there, sir?
Yes, indeed. I'm on the call. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. So my first question to you, based on your experiences in Somalia, where you've faced repeated droughts and climate shocks, like back-to-back 4 years in a row of drought, but we've also seen the initiatives taken by the government to build in like long-term adaptation strategies. Like some of the achievements that have happened over the last years have been absolutely remarkable. On a practical level, can you tell us how is anticipatory social protection strengthening your ability to respond earlier and protect livelihoods and food security of your population? If you could give us some practical examples of how that's working for you in Somalia, we'd be really grateful to learn from you.
I mean, well, first of all, thank you so much, and I really also thank for the panelists and the organizers for this important session. Somalia, as most of you would know, we have long been going through a very protracted humanitarian and social crisis that has crippled institutions to deliver the services that the people of Somali people would need and required. So over the last few years, and particularly in this government, we have been really working around and putting some mechanisms to understand and make sure that we elevate and reduce the level of the suffering and the toll. I mean, we're again we are Somalia remains to be the second country that is extremely exposed to climate shocks, and as a result, whenever there's a climate shocks, then there is a cascading crisis that are unfolding in the community. So and it manifests into a different crisis. Some of them through the livelihood crisis, water crisis, and drought crisis, and so it encompasses across the sector. So from a government perspective, couple practical solutions that we have put in place. Number one is we've walked around our country platform systems, having a very strong, robust country platform, institutions that can have a government approach, government-led solutions. Some of the early warning systems. We've now have an early warning agents that can put the early warning mechanisms in place, not necessarily on time, but at least we have now the mechanisms in place that can be activated. That's number one. Now we have a social protection policy within the Ministry of Social Affairs that's working, and we are closely partnering with the World Bank, running the largest social protection program called Bahnano in the country. So that is also another program that is now helping and getting millions of Somali out of the social protection programs, and they are graduating it through different stages. That's number two. And number three, we are now mobilizing the internal and domestic resources to make sure that the local resources are immediately activated when there is a social protection need in the country. So we're partnering with the private sector, we're partnering with the banks, and we're also partnering with other development financiers in the country to make sure that resources are available. The only challenge that now we have, and this is something that we generally share with, is the early action. We can have early action in place, and this is where the government of Somalia is laser focused to ensure that we mobilize the early action resources so that we can immediately activate should there be a need. And then finally, I think there's a question that I think I've not heard from my other colleagues, maybe others will speak, is about the question of the data and the numbers. I mean, in Somalia, we still have a very fragmented, disaggregated data. Some of them are generated by development partners, some are generated by the private. So how do you make sure also you harmonize a data that speaks to and that can reflect the reality on the ground? So we're also harmonizing and having a country-led data to make sure that decisions that we make are informed and built based on facts and figures. So that's another practical work that we are undertaking. And then in conclusion, I think we're also having some long-term development plans, such as the National Transformational Plan, which is the country's vehicle for development, and it is looking in alleviating the poverty level in the country by investing strong resilient institutions such as the adaptation and the mitigations. And there's a whole host of an ambition plan that we are working within the National Development Plan that's looking for the next 10 years. So those are the practical examples that we put in place, but also more importantly that we have a plan, and that plan lays out clearly the resources that we need, the data that we need to work on, and the policy coherence that we need to put in place. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, sir. Please, if you would have time, I'm quite sure there's going to be a lot of questions for you. If you would have time to hang on for the community conversation at the end. Thank you so much. I have so many questions for you, but we have to hand over to the next speaker. I'm really very honored to welcome Emiliano Graziano. I believe he's on the call. Yes, I see you there smiling in the corner. So Emiliano, you're the director for the Institute for Zero Hunger in Brazil. Brazil has obviously quite some achievements in recent years, being removed from the Zero Hunger Map 2024. There's so much to learn from Brazil and your experiences. I wonder if I could ask you, so in terms of food crises, your expertise on this topic, triggered by climate shocks. So how can anticipatory social protection prevent food insecurity before it escalates into a humanitarian emergency? Could you give us your hot tips, practical insights, and experience?
Yes, thank you, Anita. Can you hear me well, everybody? Yeah, thank you. So greetings to all distinguished speakers and colleagues. I'm pleased here to share our experience working with IIED and Comic Relief on the Aspire diagnostic and the development of a roadmap for anticipatory actions through social protection here in Brazil. This partnership has provided useful insights into how our social protection systems can be strengthened to deliver climate resilience. You highlighted, but we have one of the most extensive and mature social protection systems in the Global South. Brazil's social protection programs have contributed to reducing poverty and inequality, improving access to education and health services, and providing income security for low-income households. At the core of this architecture, is Bolsa Familia program, which provides regular cash transfer to more than 20 million households, reaching a significant share of people living in poverty in Brazil. Through the Aspire diagnostic, we accessed our readiness for anticipatory action across national policies, systems, and flagship programs, including Bolsa Familia and others. The assessment finds that social protection objectives are anchored in constitutional rights, national registers such as Cadastro Único, providing a wide coverage and enable rapid identification of vulnerable households, and delivery systems, which have demonstrated the ability to scale quickly during crises, most notably during the COVID-19 response. Our social protection system could improve climate resilience by integrating anticipatory action into national policy. This shift would enable support like cash transfers or food to be automatically activated using data-driven triggers related to climate risk, helping households maintain food security and protect children and vulnerable groups. Anticipatory social protection provides aid before the crisis occurs, relying on scientific forecasts and early warning systems. When risks such as drought or floods are detected, funding and resources can be released in advance, empowering households to take preventive steps. However, challenges remain, including institutional resistance to resource allocation based on forecasts rather than observed crises, and maintain program continuity through government changes. The economic analysis conducted by IIED provides the quantified evidence that we need to convince funders and policymakers. It reinforces the case for early action. For every dollar spent on early resistance has been shown to result in reduced humanitarian spending development gains of approximately $5.17. FAO has another number for this, only for food security, that goes around $7. By acting earlier in the risk cycle and by using existing registries, delivery platforms, and programs more strategically, Brazil can reduce the impacts of climate shocks, improve cost effectiveness of social protection spending, and strengthen long-term resilience. The debate on anticipatory social protection cannot be reduced to existence of early warning systems or the dissemination of alerts to the population. Drawing on the experience and the work of Zero Hunger Institute, it becomes evident that effective protection depends on broader structural conditions, including levels of preparedness, historical partners of territorial occupation, and political decisions accumulated over decades. We demonstrated that vulnerability to hunger was not merely the result of sudden shocks, but of long-standing social, economic, and spatial inequalities that shaped both exposure to risk and the capacity to respond. In recent years, extreme climate events have profoundly altered the risk landscape. For example, the urban drainage system and other forms of infrastructure were designed according to historical rainfall patterns and are no longer adequate to cope with the volume and intensity of precipitation now observed. As a result, their protective function has been undermined. In this context, early warning mechanisms, while necessary, are far from sufficient. As the lessons from Zero Hunger suggest, information alone does not guarantee protection. If people lack the material conditions, institutional support, and special alternative required to act upon. For an alert to be effective, it must not only signal impending damage, but also direct people towards a genuinely safe and accessible place. In many territories, such places either do not exist, are now inaccessible, or no longer safer under climate conditions that exceed historical norms. Receiving an alert does not automatically translate into knowing what to do or being able to act. Without guidance and support, warnings may generate paralysis rather than protection. Context sensitivity is central to effectiveness on anticipatory measures. In Brazil, food insecurity is particularly acute in the Northeast region and among traditional and indigenous communities, whose livelihoods depend directly on environmental integrity and territorial security. For these groups, anticipatory social protection must go beyond cash transfers and incorporate target measures such as the advanced distribution of drought-resistant seeds, agricultural tools, and logistical support to move production before flooding occurs, thereby protecting livelihoods rather than consumption alone. Urban vulnerabilities also require attention, as rising unemployment and food prices can rapidly translate into hunger, even in the absence of climate shocks. Concrete experiences illustrate the potential of anticipatory approach when embedded in broader public policy frameworks. Emergency funds released in response of drought alerts across hundreds of municipalities, together with long-standing initiatives such as 1 Million Cisterns programs, one of the Zero Hunger program projects that provided materials and trained the population to build cisterns in their homes and later throughout the community as local multiplier agents, demonstrated how early intervention, social mobilization, and infrastructure tailored to local circumstances can maintain access to water, sustain food production, and uphold dignity during extended periods of climate stress. Such programs also highlight the importance of continuous engagement between the state and the society, rather than ad hoc responses limited to moments of crisis. The experience and the work of our institute underscore that anticipatory protection can only prevent climate shocks from cascading into food crises when it's embedded in integrated long-term public policies that link risk reduction, social protection, social engagement, and territorial planning. Central to this approach is a permanent and preventive articulation between public authorities, civil society, and local community leaderships, established well before the disasters occurs. Such a coordination builds trusts, strengthens community capacities, and enables local actors to translate institutional response into effective action during extreme events, while also influencing strategic territorial planning to minimize exposure and vulnerability over time. In a context of increasing climate instability, sustaining and integrating policies such as Bolsa Familia, anticipatory financing mechanism, and community-based infrastructure is essential to ensure that timely protection not only responds to crises, but transforms development trajectories and safeguards lives and livelihoods in an increasingly uncertain environment. Crucially, the Brazilian experience demonstrates not only strong and permanent social articulation can ensure both survival and the effectiveness of public social protection policies. The trajectory of Zero Hunger program shows that policies aimed at preventing hunger and vulnerability are not sustained by technical design alone, but by continuous interaction between the state and the society. This articulation found its main institutional locus in the National Council of Food and Nutritional Security, for example, our CONSEA, a participatory body that brought together representatives of government, civil society to joint plan, monitor, and evaluate food security policies. It functioned as a space of social control, policy coordination, and accountability, allowing local knowledge, community demands, and territorial realities to directly inform and influence national decision-making. Its experiences illustrates how participatory governance strengthens legitimacy, protects policy from political discontinuity, and enables timely adjustments in the face of emerging risks.
Liano, thank you so much. I
No,
have
that's
so
it.
many
Thank you.
questions for you, but I'm afraid I want to try to fit in another couple of speakers before we have the conversation. Could I ask you, like, there's so many things that you unpacked there, and I have so many questions as well. Could you share a couple of links to some of the things that you mentioned just now, because I think there's really a lot that we can learn from, and I think this is something that I definitely need to take a look at in more detail. Like, so it would be really appreciated if you could share.
I'll share in the chat here.
Thank you so much. We have one more speaker to talk about his practical experiences in Malawi, a real champion, because he managed to step in at the last moment this morning, because unfortunately Mr. Emmanuel Zek had a tragic loss of a friend. I would like also if people in the call to just take a look at Emmanuel Zek's his profile and some of his work. I also learned a lot reading a little bit from his LinkedIn profile. He's on the global board of the Network of Civil Society Organizations for Disaster Reduction, world's biggest network of civil society organizations. Their work is actually really, really interesting, really, really incredible. I will really make an effort to connect with him. It's a shame that he can't be on the call today. However, every cloud has a silver lining, and the silver lining is, don't tell me Mr. Dorwell can't be with us today, Ritu.
No, I just wanted to come at the back of what you mentioned about Emmanuel. In fact, it's a shame that Emmanuel could not join, because he could have really shared some of the perspectives, because we started the roadmap exercise first in Senegal and then we moved on to Brazil. So we are doing some great work around that roadmap building exercise in partnership with the Ministry of Environment in Senegal, and Emmanuel's team, ENDA Energy, which many of you might be familiar with if you're working in Senegal. As you know, we already have developed quite a bit on that roadmap exercise. So please look out in this space, because we'll be sharing some evidence and some really practical work from that space very shortly. And of course, Emiliano's work in Brazil will also be sharing some more evidence in future.
Please. So thank you so much. Yeah, please share in the chat, like, the links to all of this incredible work. So I want to welcome Dr. Dorwell Kalamanga. He works with a grassroots organization in Malawi called Total Land Care, working with communities building resilience. I want to ask you a very quick question, and then I hope you can stay on for the community conversation. So again, another country that has faced repeated shocks, different climate shocks in recent years. Based on your field experience, how can social protection programs better be used, not just to respond, but to anticipate? And maybe can you pinpoint, could you choose like one of the most critical elements for readiness, maybe just to give us a practical example, like between early warning systems, financing, or the delivery mechanisms? Are you with us, sir?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Hello.
We can hear you, sir.
Oh, excellent. Thanks so much. My name is Donald Kamalongo from Malawi. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Zwidejere, who has been caught up for other commitments. So I'm going to present what he told me to present. So I think there's a response to the main question, which I think you are aware of. He said, of course, that Malawi has indeed faced repeated floods and climate shocks in recent years, and these are becoming more frequent and severe. From field experience, one important point to highlight is that Malawi already has strong policy framework for social protection and climate resilience. Programs like social cash transfer programs are well established and aligned with the resilience objective. However, the key challenge is not policy, but its implementation. Currently, systems are still reactive, meaning support reaches communities after shock has occurred already. To truly build resilience, social protection needs to shift from response to anticipation. So there are a few practical ways to achieve this. One, we need to strengthen link between early warning systems and early action. Malawi has early warning systems, but they are always translated into timely support. Focus should trigger predefined actions, such as early cash transfers before floods or droughts impact communities. Secondly, social protection needs to become more adaptive and scalable. This means expanding beneficiary coverage and increasing support during shocks rather than maintaining static systems. Thirdly, the community-based monitoring is critical. Locally led data collection help to capture real-time impacts and ensure that support reaches the most vulnerable. This also builds trust and improves targeting. Finally, we need to strengthen delivery systems and local institutions to ensure that support is truly timely, transparent, and inclusive. So overall, Malawi has a strong foundation, but the focus now must be on operationalizing these policies at larger scale. So he indicated that in response to question number 3, in response to the panel question in response to panel question, all 3 panelists, if I had to prioritize one element for readiness, I would say that financing triggers all the most critical. Even when early warning systems are in place, without pre-arranged automatically triggers financing. Action is often delayed. Financing is what enables early warning system translate into early action. That said, readiness depends on the combination of the 3. That means there's early warning, provide signal, financing triggers, enable action, delivery system, enable that support to reach people. But in many contexts, including Malawi, financing triggers are often the missing link. Thanks so much. This is what I have. Over to you, the chair.
Thank you so much, sir. I think you really put your your finger on the point exactly there. And I'll be coming back to you on those points in the conversation shortly, hopefully. So to catch up, I'll move straight on to the last section where we have Gavin White from the Risk Informed Early Action Partnership on the line. You're still with us, Gavin, I hope, and Alison Robertshaw, the head of Climate Justice and Comic Relief. I'm big fans of both of you. I've read and learned a lot from both of you over the last few years. So I'm really, really happy to have you both on the call. So very quickly, a question for Alison from a funder's perspective. What gives confidence that anticipatory social protection is a good investment? And what kind of systems or evidence do you think needs unlocking? And the question for Gavin is, so REAP, we all know and love REAP. You've been working to strengthen early warning and early action systems globally. And what progress have you seen since COP30 in linking early warning with AA and social protection? So 2 quick questions there for you to kind of wrap up some really interesting information so far. So Alison, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much. This is an interesting question because as a donor, we have been working with IIED in this space, and the economic analysis that Ritu and her team have done made it really clear that this is the future of how we can get funding to local communities, and we can try to at least claw back some of the resources that have been cut out of the system with so many of the ODA cuts. What I think's really been hard for us, though, is the struggle of bringing other funders along in this space, because the innovative nature and the power of this work about cross-cutting between development work and climate work and those two finance streams, what makes it so powerful also makes it really, really difficult for funders to fund, at least in the philanthropy space, which is where I come from, because we often work in silos. We want to address livelihoods, or we want to address health, or we want to address climate adaptation. And when you have a system that works that attaches all those things, that's great, except for funders really don't know how to fund in that space. And so I think what we all need to do, because I know we are all on this call proponents of this work, is we need to take funders on a journey and recognize that it will be a process. We also need to find ways to allow people to dock into it in whichever way they're able to. So, for example, with IIED, we've put together a pooled fund. We've managed to pull in £10 million, for example, from Sainsbury's, because they care about food. So we've been able to dock in a big corporate who cares about anticipatory social protection, which they had really never heard the term 6 or 8 months ago, because we were able to show them how their concerns about the thing they care about food, fit into this broader systems and conversation. So I guess what I'm saying is that if we're going to be really honest about how we do this and what we need all of you who are working in this space to take people on a journey, to keep talking about it, to make sure that the climate community doesn't back out just because it's uncomfortable or it's not an easy way to fund. And I'm just conscious that's not going to be straightforward or super quick, but it's a piece of work that's needed. And I think we are getting people there. IIED got Comic Relief there with $1 million or $2 million of our money. We got Sainsbury's there. I think we'll get other people there. It's a process that we all need to work together towards. I hope that answered the question.
It really does. And like whatever we can do as a community to try to make the communication, the advocacy, easier. Whatever resources anybody can share, for example, now in the chat, there's lots of advocacy resources out there. There's lots of, now we've got the evidence, in different places. We have an evidence database on the Anticipation Hub. We have a whole bunch of resources with REAP. We have so many things. So now really is the time to kind of make sure that we, I think, meet regularly and really give each other the tools and the resources and the support to do that. So I really like that, Alison. It's really satisfying, and to hear of some of the success stories. And but I don't usually shop at Sainsbury's when I'm home, I have to say. But I like them a lot more now, and maybe I will next time I'm home. Gavin, if you can remember my question to you.
Thanks, Anita. No, this is a really nice space because I think it is a bit tapping each other in the back, but I think there's been so much great progress from the actors here. I think this is really nice just to have these stronger relations. I think this is an amazing kind of discussion. I think the question is just in general the progress we've seen recently from across the REAP partnership. Because we come from a partnership, again, we were just at the Secretariat, a small group of facilitators. But I'm just going to very quickly touch on maybe a few points of what we've seen recently, and then maybe I'll open the floor for other thoughts as well, and I'll try to share some links. So this week I'm in Panama for the Civil Protection Conference in Panama, and it's really nice because they've really put a strong emphasis on adaptive social protection. We had an entire session 4 hours 2 days ago, and it's really nice to see how they're trying to bring together ministers, humanitarian agencies, and have these discussions together. So, and in terms of our first trend, this is happening everywhere. Having more of those regional discussions where they bring in the different ministries, I think is an important piece of the puzzle, and having very well designed sessions, very interactive. So that was one first point I wanted to highlight. The second one is just looking across our 100 or so partners in the REAP partnership. There's a really strong, we can really see a significant increase in literature, and we have to do that more in depth of mapping who is writing about those linkages between social protection and early warning and early action. And just quickly, I mean, obviously IAED has been leading on this, but there's a lot from the World Bank, GFDR, the Red Cross, WFP, FAO, Green Climate Fund, BMZ ODI, Center for Disaster Protection, Save the Children. I was just doing a quick search, and all of them have dedicated reports looking at those linkages. So I think it's about going more in depth and looking about how we can document those and better connect across those. The third point, I think, is just looking at that we have ever stronger assessment tools. It was really great to see the presentation. As always, big fan of Ritu's work on the and her colleagues on Aspire, and I took good notes about the comprehensive climate impact quantification. And thanks, Martin, for sharing that longer list of IED publications. On the session we had here on Tuesday, there was actually an interesting one, which I'll share in the chat, which was a maturity model from the Inter-American Development Bank on adaptive social protection systems. Looking at different dimensions across different indicators, where they pretty much overlay kind of where there are social protection systems in place, where there are populations that maybe are not covered, and where there's disaster risk, and trying to see where does that mean, where should there be stronger emphasis on that in Central America. So I'll share that link as well. The fourth point, I think, is about increased collaboration. I think the fact that we have all of these different working groups. There's the GIZ's Global Alliance for Social Protection as well, which I think is a good trend as well. And then another point, probably number 5 on my list, is the fact that we're, I think, through these different processes of mapping different perspectives from different actors, from different sectors, having more coherent and advocacy messages. So we have this paper on getting ahead of disasters and protecting people at scale. That's one of the papers that is trying to make sense of all these messages. And the last point I'll make is just about the fact that we want to really look at the fact that there's a lot of new approaches being piloted at country level. It's not new, but I think it's reaching scale as it's being tested, like in Fiji or in the Philippines and elsewhere. So I think there's a real argument to say that we now have all the pieces in place. And I liked how this session really highlighted the finance arguments to fund this, because ultimately social protection can have more impact if the early action is effective, and also we don't have the negative coping strategies that would put vulnerable groups back to where they were perhaps previously before social protection, and vice versa. Disaster management can really benefit by building on existing social protection systems. It's much cheaper and it really helps to strengthen the whole system. So I think we're getting slowly there. I think this is an amazing space, and we're happy to continue to support from the Small Reef Secretariat on all of you as part of these discussions. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And like, before I switch off the recording now, and we have the last few minutes to kind of like have a chat and answer questions, I just want to say, I don't know about you, but I'm quite overwhelmed by the amount of information out there. And sometimes there's a resource for almost everything, and sometimes it's not always easy to find it. So I would just say, if in doubt, like, I think you have the contacts of like some of the institutions that have been tasked to try to share knowledge and evidence and contacts and networks. Like, you know, you have Gavin here in the call, you have us at the hub in the call. Like, so please just reach out. Like, our contacts are online, and just ask. If in doubt and you're overwhelmed, just ask, and we're here to try to help you, give you what you need to move forward. So I think we'll turn off the recording now. Tim, if you could turn off the recording. And so I think from what I can see in the Q&A, like I think all of the questions have been answered, and I think the questions in the chat have been answered